When my daughter told me her best friend would be staying with us for a few weeks, I thought it would be just another ordinary visit. I expected laughter echoing from her room, late-night whispers, and the usual teenage mess scattered across the living room. What I didn't expect was how much that visit would change me. The first evening seemed simple enough: pizza boxes on the table, soda cans rolling around, and the two of them giggling about things I didn't even understand anymore. But every time I glanced over at her friend, I felt something I couldn't put into words. Her smile carried a warmth that pulled me in, her voice seemed to linger even after she stopped speaking, and for the first time in years, I caught myself paying attention to someone in a way I thought I had buried deep long ago. That I tried to brush it off, convincing myself it was nothing. But as the days passed, the way she looked at me, so gentle, so attentive, made my heart stir in ways I hadn't let it for a very long time. I was a mother, I reminded myself. I was supposed to be responsible, careful, distant even. Yet, the more I told myself to ignore it, the harder it became. What happened in our home over those weeks was not just about unexpected feelings. It was about rediscovering parts of myself I thought were gone, facing the weight of judgment and fear, and realizing that love can come quietly, without permission, and still turn your world upside down. And it all began the night I caught her eyes lingering on me, just a little too long. When my daughter first told me her best friend would be staying with us, I didn't think much of it. Over the years, she had plenty of friends come and go, some staying for a night, others just visiting for a few hours. But this time felt slightly different, though I couldn't explain why at first. Maybe it was the way my daughter spoke about her, with a kind of warmth and admiration I hadn't noticed before. Maybe it was just my imagination. I told myself it would be like any other teenage sleepover: messy rooms, whispered secrets late into the night, and laughter bouncing off the walls. I had no reason to expect anything unusual. Yet when the day came, and her friend walked through our front door with a polite smile and a shy hello, something shifted inside me. She wasn't extraordinary at first glance. A simple pair of jeans, a plain sweater, her hair tied up without much effort. But there was a softness about her, a calm energy that seemed to fill the room without her trying. She carried herself in a way that felt older than her years, as if she had lived through more than she let on. I greeted her politely, trying not to stare, but the truth is, from the very beginning, she caught my attention in a way no one had for a very long time. That evening was as ordinary as I had expected. The girls spread out in the living room, their school books open but quickly forgotten as they slipped into fits of laughter. I sat in the kitchen, pretending to scroll through my phone, though I was really listening. Their inside jokes made no sense to me, but the joy in their voices made me smile. Every now and then, I would catch her friend's voice, so steady, clear, and almost melodic. Each word carried a weight, even when she was just teasing my daughter about something silly. It was strange, the way her presence lingered in my thoughts. I had spent years convincing myself that parts of me were gone, hidden away under the responsibilities of motherhood, the exhaustion of work, and the numbness of routine. Yet, in the middle of that ordinary night, something stirred, something I didn't want to acknowledge. As I cleared away the empty pizza boxes, I caught her glancing at me. It was quick, almost accidental, but I felt it. Her eyes met mine, and for just a second, the air felt heavier, thicker. I looked away, my heart beating a little faster than it should have. It made no sense. I barely knew her. She was just my daughter's friend, a teenager in my home for a short while. But that fleeting moment unsettled me. I brushed it off, reminding myself that I was being ridiculous, that I was imagining things. Still, as the night went on, I found myself paying more attention than I should. The way her laughter filled the silence, the way she leaned in close when my daughter whispered something, the way she thanked me when I brought them drinks, it was all so normal, yet it felt different. Later that night, when they went off to my daughter's room, I lingered in the kitchen longer than necessary. I stared at the dishes in the sink, scrubbing the same plate over and over, my mind drifting back to that brief exchange of eyes. It had been years since anyone had looked at me in a way that made me feel seen. My marriage had been a series of disappointments, a slow erosion of intimacy and affection. By the time it ended, I had closed off that part of myself entirely, telling myself it didn't matter, that I didn't need it anymore. I had convinced myself I was fine being just a mother, just a provider, just someone who existed for others. But here I was, restless in my own kitchen, because of a girl who barely knew me. That I went to bed late that night, but sleep didn't come easily. I kept hearing her voice, replaying that look in her eyes, trying to convince myself it was nothing. My heart told me otherwise. Something about her had stirred something I wasn't ready to face. Lying there in the dark, I wondered why it was her, why now, why at all. I tried to push it away, tried to bury it like I had buried every other feeling I didn't want to deal with. But the truth is, something had already begun, something I couldn't quite name, and deep down, I knew it wouldn't stay silent for long. That was only the first night, and already my world felt different. The next morning came quietly, with sunlight slipping through the curtains and the faint sound of laughter coming from my daughter's room. I lingered in bed longer than usual, staring at the ceiling, still unsettled by the strange weight of the night before. I tried to convince myself that it had been nothing, just a momentary trick of the mind, but the more I replayed it, the more I knew it wasn't something I could ignore. There was a tension there, a subtle shift in me, and it made me nervous. I got up eventually, making my way to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. The smell of coffee filled the air, and I let the warmth of the cup soothe me, grounding me back into routine. It was easier to hide behind chores than to face thoughts I didn't want to admit. They both came into the kitchen not long after, with messy hair and tired eyes, but full of energy as if they hadn't stayed up until the early hours. My daughter chatted endlessly about some show they had watched, her hands flying as she spoke, while her friend sat at the table quietly, her eyes flicking between me and my daughter, smiling in all the right places. She wasn't loud or demanding, but her presence was magnetic. She had a way of listening that felt intentional, as though she absorbed every word with care. I placed pancakes on the table, and she looked at me with a soft smile, her voice low as she said thank you. It was simple, ordinary, but it felt different. That single word lingered in the air longer than it should have, and I found myself stealing glances at her as I moved around the kitchen. Throughout the day, I kept finding excuses to be around them. I told myself it was because I wanted to make sure they were comfortable, that I was just being a good host, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. I wanted to hear her voice again, to catch those small moments when her eyes lingered just a fraction longer than necessary. They sat in the living room, flipping through old photo albums my daughter had pulled from the shelves. I pretended to tidy nearby, but really, I was listening. Every so often, her laughter would break through, warm and genuine, and I felt it ripple through me like sunlight cutting into a cold room. My daughter didn't notice, too wrapped up in the nostalgia of her own memories, but I noticed everything. That afternoon, I offered to take them out for ice cream, just to get them out of the house. My daughter jumped at the idea, eager for any excuse to go out, while her friend simply smiled and nodded. At the ice cream shop, I watched the two of them share flavors, teasing each other with stolen bites and inside jokes. I reminded myself that they were young, carefree, living in a world that still felt new and wide. I envied that freedom. But then her eyes met mine again across the table, just for a second, and I felt my chest tighten. It wasn't a bold look, it was subtle, fleeting, but heavy with something I didn't want to name. I broke the moment quickly, focusing on my melting cone, but my hands trembled slightly, betraying me. When we got home, my daughter disappeared into her room to call another friend, leaving me alone in the kitchen with her. The silence stretched between us, gentle but filled with unspoken things. She leaned against the counter, watching me as I put groceries away, and for the first time, I felt the weight of her gaze fully. It wasn't just polite. It wasn't just friendly. It was searching, deliberate, almost as though she could see through me. My heart raced, and I forced myself to keep moving, to act normal, though my hands fumbled with the bags. She finally broke the silence with a soft laugh, asking if I needed help. I nodded, though I didn't really, and together we stood side by side, unpacking small things like milk and bread, yet every second felt charged with something far more significant. Later that evening, when the house quieted again, I sat alone in the living room with a book I couldn't focus on. My daughter and her friend were upstairs, their muffled voices drifting down, and though I tried to push the thoughts away, I couldn't. It had been years since anyone made me feel this way, years since I even allowed myself to feel it. I thought I had closed that part of myself forever, buried it under the demands of motherhood and the scars of a failed relationship. But she had undone it in just 2 days, without even trying. That realization terrified me. She was too young, too close to my daughter, too many reasons why it shouldn't be, and yet, none of that stopped my heart from wanting more of the warmth she carried. When I finally went to bed, I couldn't sleep again. My mind kept replaying the day, the soft thank yous, the way she listened, the accidental touches when our hands brushed over the grocery bags, the eyes that seemed to hold me in place. It was too much and not enough all at once. I turned over in bed, pressing my face into the pillow, telling myself I had to stop this, that it couldn't go anywhere. But deep down, I already knew I was lying to myself. Something had started, something I couldn't control, and no matter how much I resisted, it was only going to grow stronger. The third day began with a strange heaviness in my chest, the kind of weight that comes when you know you are carrying a secret you don't yet have the strength to name. I moved through the motions of making breakfast, frying eggs and buttering toast, while my thoughts wandered in circles I couldn't escape. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her. Not in some exaggerated, dramatic way, but in quiet moments, the tilt of her head when she listened, the way her lips curved into a soft smile, the way her gaze seemed to hold me longer than anyone else's. It unsettled me deeply, because these were things I wasn't supposed to notice. I had spent years building walls around myself, walls that kept me safe, walls that made me believe I had outgrown the need for affection, for tenderness, for desire. Yet here I was, feeling cracks form in places I thought were solid. When they came downstairs, my daughter still half asleep and her friend fully awake with that calm energy she always carried, I felt that shift again. She said good morning in a tone that made the simple greeting sound personal, as though it was meant only for me. I tried to brush it off, busying myself with the plates and pouring coffee. My daughter ate quickly, rushing off to get ready for a study session she had planned with another classmate, leaving the two of us alone in the kitchen. The silence stretched in a way that wasn't uncomfortable but rather intense, filled with everything neither of us dared to say. She offered to help clean up, and though I told her it wasn't necessary, she insisted, standing close enough that I could feel the warmth of her presence. Each time our hands brushed while stacking dishes, my stomach tightened, and I forced myself to keep my eyes down. When my daughter left, promising to be gone for a few hours, the house felt too quiet. Her friend lingered in the living room while I sat at the edge of the couch with a book I wasn't reading. The television was off, the ticking of the clock seemed louder than usual, and I could feel her eyes on me every so often. Finally, she asked me about my life. Simple questions at first, about work, about the town, about little things. I answered carefully, trying to keep my voice steady, but the more she asked, the more I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't expected. I told her about how hard it had been after my marriage ended, how I had poured everything into raising my daughter, how I sometimes felt invisible, like the world had moved on without me. She didn't interrupt. She listened with a kind of intensity one wasn't used to, and in her silence, I felt something dangerous, comfort. At one point, I looked up and found her watching me with a softness that was hard to mistake. It wasn't pity. It wasn't casual. It was something else, something that made my breath hitch. I quickly looked away, my cheeks warm, scolding myself for letting the moment linger too long. She shifted closer, not enough to be inappropriate, but enough to make the air feel heavy. She said in a quiet voice that I deserved to be happy, that I shouldn't let the past define what I allowed myself to feel. Her words cut deeper than I expected, because they touched on a truth I had buried. I had convinced myself that my happiness no longer mattered, that my role was only to give, to sacrifice, to be steady for others. But here was this young woman reminding me that I was still human, that I still had the right to feel alive. The hours slipped by, the conversation flowing from light topics to heavier ones, and before I knew it, the sun was dipping low, painting the walls with shades of orange. I realized how long it had been since I had shared myself with anyone this way, without fear of judgment, without holding back. There was a quiet intimacy in the way she looked at me, her eyes warm and steady, and I felt myself falling into that gaze even as my mind screamed at me to resist. I knew this was dangerous, that allowing myself to indulge in these feelings could unravel everything, yet I couldn't deny the pull. When my daughter finally returned, the spell broke, and the house was filled again with her bright energy and chatter. I forced myself back into the role of mother, smiling and listening, acting as though nothing had shifted. But inside, I knew everything had. That day had changed the shape of something between us. It was no longer fleeting glances or accidental touches. It was real now, tangible, alive. And though I told myself I would be strong enough to stop it, to bury it again, the truth was that I didn't want to. A part of me had woken up, and no matter how much I tried to deny it, I couldn't put it back to sleep. The next few days blurred together in a rhythm that felt strangely unfamiliar, as though life inside the house had taken on a new current beneath the surface. My daughter carried on with her usual teenage energy, her laughter and busyness filling the rooms, but I found myself more aware of every small detail when her friend was around. It was in the way she moved through the house quietly, never imposing yet always present, or how she leaned against the kitchen counter when she spoke to me, her posture relaxed but her eyes watchful. It was unsettling how much space she began to occupy in my thoughts, even when she wasn't in the room. I had always prided myself on control, on being grounded, on keeping my emotions locked away where no one could reach them, but I was starting to feel undone by something as simple as her presence. One evening, my daughter was invited to a movie night with a group of classmates. She begged me to let her go, and when she rushed out of the house with her usual excitement, it left me alone with her friend again. I thought about suggesting she go too, that she shouldn't feel obligated to stay with me, but when she sat down across from me at the table with a quiet smile, I didn't say anything. We shared dinner together, just the two of us, and the silence between us felt heavy but not uncomfortable. She asked about my past again, but this time the questions went deeper, brushing against wounds I had kept closed for years. I hesitated, staring at my plate, but something about her calm patience made me speak. I told her about how lonely it had been after my marriage fell apart, how I had given up parts of myself to survive, how sometimes I felt like I had disappeared into the role of being only a mother and nothing else. The words spilled out in a way that scared me, because I hadn't meant to let her see so much. She listened the way she always did, her attention unwavering, and when I finally stopped, she said something I didn't expect. She told me she saw strength in me, that she admired the way I carried myself, that it was rare to meet someone who gave so much and asked for nothing in return. Her words cut through me like light breaking into a dark room, because they were everything I hadn't allowed myself to believe. I felt my throat tighten, and I looked away, embarrassed by how easily she could make me feel vulnerable. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing against mine for only a second, but the warmth of that touch lingered long after she pulled back. My heart raced, and for the first time in years, I felt a spark of something I had thought was gone forever. After dinner, we moved to the living room, the television playing softly in the background, though neither of us paid attention to it. The space between us on the couch felt too wide, the silence too charged, but neither of us made a move to leave. At one point, she leaned closer to show me something on her phone, and I caught the faint scent of her shampoo, a soft, clean fragrance that made my chest ache. I forced myself to steady my breathing, to act as though nothing was happening, but inside, every nerve was alive. I had lived years in a quiet numbness, and now, in one simple evening, she had managed to awaken everything I had buried. When my daughter finally returned, her voice carrying through the hall, I felt a rush of relief mixed with disappointment. Relief because the intensity of the moment had been broken, disappointment because a part of me had wanted more time alone with her, even though I knew I shouldn't. I busied myself quickly, picking up dishes and tidying the room, trying to act as though the evening had been ordinary. But it hadn't been. Nothing felt ordinary anymore. That night, lying in bed, I replayed every moment in my mind. The way she listened, the way her words had wrapped around me like a bomb, the way her hand had brushed mine so gently it felt intentional even if it wasn't. I pressed my hands against my chest, feeling the rhythm of my heartbeat, faster than it should be. I told myself over and over that it was dangerous, that I was her friend's mother, that there were lines that could never be crossed. And yet, I also knew that the lines inside me were already beginning to blur. I didn't know where this was leading, but I could feel something growing, something I couldn't control, and the thought both terrified and exhilarated me. The days that followed only deepened the quiet intensity that had begun to take shape between us. It wasn't something loud or obvious, but it was there, in the small pauses, the stolen glances, the way her eyes lingered on me when she thought I wasn't looking. I found myself drawn to her presence in ways I couldn't explain. Every morning, I listened for the sound of footsteps on the stairs, for her soft, "good morning," that felt warmer than it should, for the rhythm of her voice in the house that had once felt too silent. It was dangerous, the way my heart seemed to quicken in anticipation of something as simple as seeing her walk into the kitchen. I knew it wasn't right, that it wasn't supposed to happen, yet I couldn't deny the way it made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. One afternoon, my daughter had gone out again, leaving the two of us alone. She had planned to spend the evening with friends, and I had expected to spend a quiet night on my own. But her friend didn't leave, and instead, she sat with me at the dining table, the sunlight slanting through the window, casting a golden glow across her face. She asked me questions again, but this time, she didn't just listen, she shared pieces of herself too. She spoke about how hard it had been for her to find her place, how she had always felt different, how people didn't always understand her. There was a sadness in her words, a kind of loneliness that mirrored my own, and in that moment, I felt a connection that went deeper than I was prepared for. It wasn't just attraction, it was recognition. Two people who had carried silence for too long, finding someone who finally understood. As she spoke, I found myself reaching out without thinking, my hand resting lightly on hers. It was instinctive, unplanned, and when our skin touched, the air between us shifted again, heavier, charged. She looked at me then, really looked, her eyes steady and unafraid, as though she knew exactly what was happening and was daring me not to turn away. My heart pounded in my chest, and for a long moment, I couldn't breathe. I wanted to pull back, to break the moment before it crossed into something I couldn't take back, but I didn't. I let my hand stay there, feeling the warmth of her skin, the steady rhythm of her pulse beneath my fingers. It was such a small thing, yet it felt monumental, as though the world had tilted and everything I thought I knew about myself was shifting. That we stayed like that longer than we should have, until the sound of a car pulling into the driveway startled us both. I pulled away quickly, my hands trembling, my breath uneven. My daughter walked in moments later, chattering about her evening, completely unaware of what had just passed between us. I forced a smile, forced my voice to steady, but inside, I was reeling. That simple touch had undone me. It had awakened something I couldn't ignore anymore. It wasn't a passing thought or a fleeting glance. It was real, undeniable, and terrifying. That night, when I lay in bed, I replayed it all again and again. The feel of her hand beneath mine, the way her eyes had held me in place, the quiet understanding in her voice when she spoke of her own struggles. I thought about how long it had been since anyone had made me feel seen, truly seen, not as a mother, not as a caretaker, but as a woman. I had buried that part of myself so deeply that I almost believed it no longer existed, and yet, with her, it was there, alive and demanding to be acknowledged. I turned over restlessly, my mind battling between what I knew was right and what my heart was screaming for. The guilt pressed down on me as heavily as the longing. I reminded myself again and again that this was dangerous, that it couldn't happen, that I had to be stronger. But then I would remember her eyes, her voice, her hand beneath mine, and the wall I had built around myself began to crumble further. I was caught between fear and desire, between duty and the aching need to feel alive again. And for the first time in years, I didn't know if I wanted to resist. The tension between us grew heavier with each passing day, though no words had been spoken to acknowledge it. It was the kind of unspoken current that wrapped itself around the simplest moments, making them feel charged, dangerous, and yet irresistible. I found myself paying attention to details I had never noticed before, the way her laughter softened into silence, the way her hand lingered on the back of a chair as she walked past, the way she sometimes looked at me with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. I told myself repeatedly that I had to put distance between us, that I had to remind myself of the roles we occupied, that I was her best friend's mother, nothing more. But every effort I made to create space seemed to collapse the moment we were in the same room together. One evening, the house was unusually quiet. My daughter had locked herself in her room with headphones on, lost in her own world, leaving me and her friend sitting in the living room. The television flickered in the background, playing some show neither of us was watching, and the air between us felt weighted with all the words we weren't saying. I tried to keep my eyes on the screen, to focus on anything but her, but my body betrayed me. I felt her presence like a pull, the way her body shifted closer to mine, not enough to touch, but close enough to make the silence throb. My chest tightened, my palms dampened, and I told myself I had to leave the room, that it was the only way to regain control. But then she spoke, her voice low and steady, asking me if I was truly happy. The question caught me off guard. It wasn't casual, not the kind of polite question people ask without caring about the answer. It was deep, deliberate, and it pierced through the facade I had been hiding behind. I froze for a moment before answering, and when I did, my voice was softer than I intended. I told her the truth, that I hadn't been happy in a long time, that I had grown used to surviving instead of living, that I had forgotten what it felt like to be wanted, cherished, or even noticed. Saying the words out loud made my throat tighten, but I couldn't stop them. They spilled out in a rush, years of silence unraveling all at once. When I finally looked at her, I found her watching me with eyes that seemed too old for her age, filled with understanding and something else I didn't dare name. She reached out slowly, almost cautiously, and placed her hand on mine. This time I didn't pull away. The warmth of her touch settled into me, calming and electrifying all at once. I knew I should have moved, should have reminded myself of the consequences, but instead I let myself sink into that moment. It felt like stepping into forbidden territory, yet also like coming home to something I had lost. Neither of us spoke for a long while. The only sounds were the faint murmur of the television and the steady rhythm of our breathing. Her hand remained on mine, and I could feel the faint tremor in her fingers, which told me she was just as affected as I was. It wasn't just me imagining this, it was real, and the realization made my heart race. When she finally did speak, her voice was barely above a whisper. She said she saw me, really saw me, in a way that no one else seemed to. Those words broke me open in ways I hadn't expected. For so long, I had lived in invisibility, blending into routines, becoming background in my own life. And here she was, telling me I was visible, telling me I mattered, that I wanted to cry, to laugh, to run, to stay, everything all at once. Instead, I just sat there, my hand still beneath hers, my eyes fixed on the space between us that suddenly felt like the most dangerous and magnetic place in the world. My daughter's footsteps upstairs finally pulled us apart, forcing me back into reality, but the damage was already done. Something between us had shifted beyond repair. That night, lying awake in the dark, I could still feel the echo of her touch. My hand tingled as though it remembered the warmth of hers, my chest ached with the weight of the unspoken, and my mind raced with thoughts I couldn't silence. I told myself that I needed to stop this before it went any further, that I needed to protect my daughter, myself, and even her from the consequences of something we both knew was wrong. But even as I whispered those promises into the darkness, I knew the truth. I didn't want to stop. I had already crossed a line in my heart, and there was no turning back. The following days carried a strange weight, as though the air in the house had thickened and every moment was wrapped in something unspoken. I found myself constantly aware of her, even when I wasn't in the same room. I knew the sound of her footsteps on the stairs, the rhythm of her laughter drifting from my daughter's room, the way her presence seemed to fill the house with a warmth I hadn't realized it was missing until she arrived. Each glance between us grew heavier, each conversation stretched with silences that said far more than words ever could. I wanted to tell myself it was my imagination, that nothing had truly shifted, but my body betrayed me. My heart quickened whenever she entered a room, my breath grew shallow when our eyes met, and I found myself inventing reasons to be near her. One afternoon, my daughter was out again, spending time with friends, leaving me and her friend alone together in the kitchen. I had been chopping vegetables, trying to keep my hands busy, when she slipped into the room and leaned against the counter. Her presence was so natural, yet it set my nerves on edge in a way I couldn't hide. She didn't say anything at first, simply watched me with a quiet expression that made me uneasy because I could feel her eyes lingering not just on what I was doing, but on me. Finally, she broke the silence by telling me I looked tired, asking if I ever allowed myself to rest. It was a simple question, but it caught me off guard. I laughed softly, though it wasn't really amusement, it was a way to hide how close her words had struck. I told her that rest was a luxury I had long ago given up, that being a mother meant always being needed, always carrying the weight of everything. She didn't argue. Instead, she stepped closer, her voice softer as she said I deserved more than that I deserved to be cared for too. Her words sank deep, almost painfully, because I knew she meant them. I felt the sting of tears at the back of my eyes and turned away quickly, not wanting her to see the cracks in me. But then I felt her hand brush lightly against my arm, a gentle touch meant to comfort, and I froze. The warmth of her skin against mine was like fire and calm all at once, a contradiction that left me breathless. I turned back slowly, meeting her gaze, and in that moment, nothing else seemed to exist. The kitchen, the world, even time itself seemed to fade away until there was only her eyes and the steady pull between us. I should have pulled back. Every part of me screamed that this was too far, that it was dangerous, that it could not happen. But another part, the part that had been starved of affection for so long, ached to stay in that moment, to let it swallow me whole. That we didn't speak, and we didn't move closer, but the silence between us became its own language. I felt the pounding of my heart, the trembling in my hands, the way my body leaned ever so slightly toward hers without me realizing it. She didn't move either, but I could feel the tension radiating from her, as though she too was caught between resistance and surrender. The sound of the front door opening shattered the spell, my daughter's voice calling out as she returned. I stepped back quickly, my hands tightening around the knife on the cutting board, pretending to busy myself as though nothing had happened. She, too, moved away, her posture casual, her expression carefully composed, but when our eyes met briefly before my daughter entered the kitchen, I saw it. The same storm, the same pull, the same dangerous truth that had taken root between us. That night, I lay in bed wide awake, my mind replaying every second of that afternoon. I thought about her hand on my arm, about the look in her eyes, about how close we had come to stepping into something neither of us would be able to take back. I felt guilt pressing heavily against my chest, but alongside it was longing, fierce and undeniable. I realized I was caught in a battle I could no longer control. The walls I had built around myself were crumbling, and no amount of logic or restraint seemed strong enough to hold them up anymore. I wanted her in a way that frightened me, not just because of what it meant, but because it revealed a part of myself I had tried to silence for so long. The truth was becoming impossible to deny. What I felt for her was no longer just a fleeting distraction or a passing mistake. It was real, alive, and growing stronger with every day. And no matter how hard I tried to bury it, the more it demanded to be seen. The final week of her stay came faster than I expected, and with it came an intensity that neither of us could ignore anymore. Every moment felt suspended, as if time itself was aware of the weight pressing down on us. I woke up each morning with a restless anticipation, knowing that soon she would no longer be in the house, no longer filling the empty spaces with her warmth and quiet presence. The thought of returning to the silence I had lived in before her filled me with dread. It was in those days that the truth fully surfaced in me. I didn't just enjoy her company, I needed it, craved it, and feared what would happen when it was gone. One evening, after my daughter had fallen asleep earlier than usual, I found myself in the living room again with her. The television glowed faintly, playing something neither of us were watching, the quiet hum of the night pressing in around us. She sat across from me at first, her knees drawn up slightly as she hugged a pillow, her eyes fixed on the floor like she was lost in thought. I studied her carefully, every detail of her face, every subtle shift of expression, and I realized how much she had come to mean to me in such a short time. She must have felt the weight of my gaze because she finally looked up, meeting my eyes with a steadiness that made my chest tighten. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. It was as though words weren't strong enough for what hung between us. Finally, she broke the silence. Her voice was quiet but unwavering as she asked me if I had ever considered what it might mean to let myself be happy again. The question hung in the air like a challenge, and I felt my throat tighten. I wanted to tell her no, that it was too dangerous, that happiness for me was no longer something to be pursued, only something to be given to others. But when I tried to answer, nothing came. Instead, tears stung my eyes before I could stop them. She moved closer then, her steps slow and deliberate, until she was sitting beside me. She reached for my hand, and this time, I didn't resist. Our fingers laced together as though it had always been meant to happen, and in that moment, I felt something inside me break open. Her presence was grounding and electrifying all at once. She didn't speak, and neither did I. Instead, we sat there with the weight of our silence, both of us aware that this was more than just a stolen moment. It was an acknowledgement, a confession without words. When she finally leaned her head against my shoulder, I closed my eyes, overwhelmed by the simplicity and the enormity of it. No one had leaned on me in years, not like that, not with trust and tenderness. I felt her breathing steady against me, and I let myself, for once, stop fighting. I let myself feel it without guilt, without fear, without the walls I had built so carefully, but even as I held on to that moment, I knew reality waited for us. She would leave soon, and the world outside this house would not understand what had bloomed here. There would be judgment, whispers, condemnation. I thought of my daughter, of the fragile line between protection and betrayal, and guilt twisted sharply inside me. Yet at the same time, I realized that I couldn't erase what had already happened in my heart. Something had been awakened that could never return to silence. That night, after she went upstairs, I stayed in the living room for hours, staring at the shadows on the walls. I thought about the years I had wasted hiding from myself, the emptiness I had grown used to, the loneliness I had mistaken for strength. And I thought about her, about how easily she had broken through all of it, simply by being herself. I didn't know what the future would hold, and maybe it was selfish to even think about it. But I also knew that for the first time in a long time, I felt alive. When the morning came and she prepared to leave, the air in the house was thick with unspoken words. My daughter hugged her tightly, unaware of the storm that raged silently between us. When it was my turn, she looked at me with eyes that carried everything we couldn't say aloud. I held her longer than I should have, breathing in the faint scent of her hair, memorizing the warmth of her against me. When we pulled apart, her hand brushed mine, a final touch, soft and deliberate. And then she was gone, leaving the house quieter than it had ever been. That I stood in that silence for a long time, my heart heavy yet alive, knowing that something irreversible had taken place. She had changed me, reminded me of who I was beneath the weight of years, and though the world might never know the truth of what had passed, I would carry it inside me always. It was dangerous, it was complicated, it was forbidden. But it was real. And sometimes, even if only for a fleeting moment, real is enough.